So, you know that really specific, slightly guilty feeling you get when you're reading some ancient historical text? Maybe you're tackling the early chapters of the Bible or some dusty Mesopotamian chronicle, and suddenly you just hit a wall.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It is like a massive, impenetrable wall of unpronounceable names.
Exactly. It's just page after page of this guy begat that guy who, lived for some unimaginable number of years, and then he begat 3 more guys. If you're anything like me, your eyes just completely glaze over.
Right, because we are so heavily conditioned by modern storytelling to look for the plot or, character development.
Yeah, we want a narrative arc.
Exactly. So when we hit a dense list of names like that, our modern brains just register it as raw, unformatted data. It feels like reading a phone book from 3,000 years ago.
It totally does. Your brain just decides, well, this is the terms and conditions of history, and you just start skimming. But today's deep dive is going to completely change how you view the most famous of these ancient lists.
It really is a fascinating one.
We are jumping into a really brilliant analysis of Genesis chapter 10, which is traditionally known by historians as the Table of Nations. And our mission today is to prove to you that this isn't just some dusty, irrelevant family tree.
No, not at all.
What we are actually looking at is an incredible, highly complex, ancient geopolitical map.
And to really understand how this text functions as a map, we kind of have to set the scene and look at the narrative context first. So we are at the foot of Mount Ararat.
Right.
According to the text, the Great Flood has just receded. So in the context of this ancient record, human history is essentially hitting the master reset button.
Wow. Yeah, you literally have exactly one family left on Earth.
Exactly. Noah and his 3 sons, Japheth, Ham, and Shem. And from this single isolated point of origin, this one family is preparing to branch out into 3 distinct, massive global zones.
The entire map of humanity is basically about to be drawn from scratch.
Right.
But hold on, let's establish some ground rules here before we get too far into the weeds. Because from a purely historical and anthropological standpoint, we know human migration is, it's incredibly messy.
Hello, absolutely. It takes thousands of years.
Right. There are dead ends, overlapping migrations, countless variables. So are we looking at literal history here? Like 3 guys just packing their bags and walking in 3 different directions? Or is this more of a literary framework the ancients used to organize their world?
That is the perfect question to frame this whole discussion. Historians view this chapter as an incredibly sophisticated ethnographic framework.
Okay.
Whether you read it as strict literal history or as profound cultural geography, the function of the text actually remains the exact same. The authors are looking out at a vast, chaotic world.
Filled with terrifying empires and strange languages, right?
Exactly. Distant trading partners, rival kingdoms. And they're using the language of genealogy to map the geopolitics. They're tracing the relationships between civilizations based on linguistic, geographical, and historical ties.
I actually have an analogy for this, and I think it helps explain how we should visualize the text. Think about an antique globe. You know the ones I'm talking about.
Oh, with the beautiful faded parchment colors.
Yeah, exactly those. Cartographers back then had this intense fear of empty spaces on their maps. So in the uncharted corners of the oceans, they would literally draw terrifying sea monsters.
Right, because they just didn't know what was actually out there.
Exactly. But what we have here in Genesis 10 is the ancient equivalent of that globe. But instead of drawing dragons and sea monsters in the margins, this ancient culture mapped out their entire known world using the names of their founding ancestors.
That is a great way to put it.
They basically categorized every nation and every empire by tracing them back to those 3 men.
That visual works beautifully. And, to read any map properly, you have to find its outer edges first to understand the scale.
Right, you have to establish the boundaries.
Exactly. So let's trace that first primary branch out from Mount Ararat. We are heading into the distant north and the west, following the lineage of Noah's son, Japheth.
And the name Japheth itself gives away his geographic destiny, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Etymology is huge in these ancient texts. The name Japheth translates roughly to expansion, or let him be enlarged.
Makes perfect sense.
And his descendants absolutely lived up to that mandate. They were the ones who pushed the boundaries, spreading out toward the rugged coastlands. They ventured into the distant islands of the Mediterranean and pushed deep into the vast freezing expanse of Eurasia.
Wow.
Japheth fathered 7 sons. You have Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tyrus.
That is quite the list.
It is. But their collective heritage laid the foundation for nations stretching all the way from the Black Sea right across to the European coastlines.
So if Japheth took the rugged coasts and the open steppes, these are the people pushing the absolute frontiers of the known world. They're the pioneers.
Exactly. Let's look at the historical fingerprints they left behind. Take Gomer, for instance. The text tells us that from Gomer came a son named Ashkenaz.
Okay.
And through Ashkenaz arose a people known historically as the Scythians.
The Scythians. I mean, even if you aren't a hardcore history buff, you've probably heard that name whispered in documentaries. They were legendary.
Oh, they were absolutely terrifying to the civilizations of the ancient Near East.
But why did the ancient authors care enough to put them on this map?
Because they were the legendary horse masters of the Eurasian steppes. Before them, warfare was largely a slow, infantry-based affair.
Right, mostly just guys marching in line.
Exactly. But the Scythians mastered horseback archery, making them this highly mobile, practically invincible nomadic force. They could strike and vanish before an organized army could even react.
Wow, that is terrifying.
They represented the wild, untamable northern frontier. And they weren't the only ones in Japheth's line with that kind of reputation. You also have Magog, which is another name associated with fierce nomadic warriors roaming the expanses of Eurasia.
And then there is Madai. I actually remember this one from high school history. Madai's descendants settled in the rugged highlands of Iran and became the ancestors of the Medes.
That's right, the Medes. Their kingdom eventually merged with the Persians, and together they exerted a massive influence on the balance of power in the ancient world.
They eventually conquered Babylon itself, didn't they?
They did. They laid the vital groundwork for what would become the sprawling Persian Empire. But, Japheth's expansion wasn't just across land, it was heavily focused on the sea, too. Which brings us to Javan.
Javan is the etymological key to the West, isn't he? Because when you look at how language drifts over time, the connection becomes really obvious.
It's actually one of the clearest linguistic links in the whole chapter. In ancient Near Eastern languages, Javan or Yawan is the root word for Ionia.
Right.
Javan became the forefather of the Ionian Greeks. His lineage flows through 4 key sons: Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim.
And these are the coastlands and the islands, right? Like Cyprus and Rhodes.
Exactly. They entirely mastered the sea. And they weren't just simple coastal traders hopping from beach to beach. They built the naval infrastructure.
The deep water ships.
Yes. The ships and the trade routes that laid the foundation for all the future Hellenic or Greek influence that would eventually dominate the entire Mediterranean.
So mapping this out mentally, Japheth's line is basically painting the extreme top and the far left edges of our antique globe.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
They are the ancient equivalent of like Wild West pioneers mixed with these early maritime explorers, just pushing out, expanding, and finding the fringes. But that leads to an obvious question.
Oh.
Yeah, if these guys are out on the fringes mastering horses and boats, they definitely aren't the ones building the heavy infrastructure back at the center. Who is building the colossal megacities?
Right. To find the builders of the ancient world's heavy infrastructure, we have to shift our focus from the nomadic outer rims and look toward the south. We're moving from the expanders to the heavy hitters.
The foundational mega empires of the ancient world.
Exactly. And all of these trace back to Noah's second son, Ham.
The geography shifts drastically here, doesn't it? The name Ham signifies hot or burn, which points us straight toward Africa and the Arabian Peninsula.
His descendants moved southward into those exact hotter climates. Ham fathered 4 primary sons: Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan.
Okay.
If Japheth's sons were the explorers and the nomads, Ham's sons were the true empire builders. They were the city founders. They gravitated toward the fertile, resource-rich river valleys where you could sustain massive populations.
Let's trace these empire builders, starting with Cush. I'm guessing they didn't just stay in one place.
Far from it. Cush was the firstborn, and he brought forth a vast, incredibly wealthy lineage. His sons, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Sabteka, and his grandsons like Sheba and Dedan, they spread all across the Arabian Peninsula and into Eastern Africa.
And those names are famous for trade, right?
Absolutely. In the ancient world, these specific names became absolutely synonymous with Arabian commerce, luxury goods, spices, and just immense wealth. But from this powerful lineage emerged one specific figure who completely altered the course of human urbanization. A man named Nimrod.
Nimrod. That is one of those legendary, towering names that just pops up in ancient lore all over the place.
Right. The text describes him as the first heroic warrior on Earth, but his real legacy is that he was a builder. He is essentially the world's first autocrat.
Really?
Yes, Nimrod is credited as the founder of the great Mesopotamian cities. We were talking about the establishment of Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Nineveh.
We really need to pause and emphasize what that means. Babylon and Nineveh aren't just cities. They are the absolute epicenters of ancient superpower.
They absolutely are.
By settling between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Nimrod's descendants controlled the literal cradle of civilization. They figured out irrigation, they built colossal mud-brick ziggurats, and they dominated global politics for millennia. And that staggering legacy comes from just one of Ham's sons.
It's incredible. And then you look at Ham's second son, Mizraim. Mizraim is actually the traditional biblical and ancient Near Eastern name for Egypt.
So Mizraim's descendants are the ones settling the Nile Valley. They are the architects of the pyramid civilization.
Exactly. They engineered a civilization that stood for thousands of years. But here is where the archaeology and the genealogy get incredibly intertwined. Mizraim's line, specifically through a group called the Casluhim, also gave rise to the Philistines.
Wait, really?
Yes. The Philistines were a seafaring people who eventually settled the eastern Mediterranean coastline. And as anyone familiar with the story of David and Goliath knows, they became the great, persistent rival of the nation of Israel.
Okay, wait, let me piece this together because the implications here are actually staggering. If you look at Canaan, Ham's youngest son, his descendants include figures like Sidon.
Yes, and Sidon is the ancestor of the Phoenicians. They were the master merchants and shipbuilders of the Levant.
Right. And Canaan also fathered Heth.
Exactly, and Heth established the Hittite Empire. We know from archaeology that the Hittites were a massive superpower in Anatolia, wielding iron chariots and rivaling even the Egyptian pharaohs.
And Canaan's line also includes the Jebusites, the original founders of the fortress city of Jerusalem, long before King David ever conquered it.
Yep.
So when you group all these descendants of Ham together, Nimrod's Babylon, Mizraim's Egypt and Philistines, Canaan's Hittites and Phoenicians, you are basically looking at a roster of the greatest historical rivals the biblical Israelites ever faced.
You really are.
These were the superpowers that enslaved them, went to war with them, and constantly threatened to wipe them off the map. But according to this very same table of nations offered by the Israelites themselves, all of these terrifying enemies were actually their distant cousins.
That is the profound, almost subversive geopolitical irony embedded right here in the text. This isn't a map drawing enemies as alien creatures or actual monsters from another world, which is what many ancient cultures did to their rivals.
Right, they aren't drawing sea monsters anymore.
Exactly. It's explicitly acknowledging that the most terrifying empires on their borders share the exact same human family tree. Ham's descendants absolutely dominated the southern regions and built the empires that would shape the geopolitical narrative for centuries.
So we have Japheth expanding to the rugged northern and western fringes. We have Ham building these colossal, heavy-hitting empires down south and in the major river valleys. That just leaves one son, Shem.
Right. With the vast borders mapped out by Japheth and the southern superpowers established by Ham, the map's focus naturally zeroes in on the geography caught directly in the crosshairs.
The ultimate ancient crossroads.
Exactly. The Fertile Crescent. This is the narrow strip of habitable land connecting Africa to Eurasia, and this is where the descendants of Shem settled.
And the name Shem is fascinating too. It signifies name or reputation.
Yeah, and his 5 sons, Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram, they settled right in the vital heart of the ancient Near East. Because of their geography, they essentially became the necessary connective tissue of this ancient world.
They weren't just middlemen though, right? I mean, they had their own heavy hitters.
Oh, absolutely. Elam founded a powerful, long-lasting civilization bordering the Persian Gulf. Ashur gave rise to the Assyrian Empire.
And the Assyrians were brutal.
Yes, we mentioned the Scythians being terrifying, but the Assyrians perfected the art of a standing army and brutal siege tactics. They were a military force that literally terrorized the ancient world. But, Shem's line is perhaps most notable for 2 massive cultural and economic mechanisms that changed how humanity operated. Let's look at Lud.
Lud was the ancestor of the Lydian kingdom in Asia Minor, right?
He was. And the Lydians are credited with inventing something that completely revolutionized human interaction: the world's first coined money.
Wow. Well, we really have to unpack the mechanism of that because it's so easy to take money for granted today. Before coins, how did these vast empires actually trade with each other?
Well, it was incredibly tedious. They used a system called hack silver.
Hack silver.
Yeah. If you wanted to buy grain, you had to physically weigh out chunks of silver on a scale for every single transaction.
Oh, wow. That sounds exhausting.
It was slow, and it was constantly prone to cheating with rigged weights. The Lydians solved this by taking a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver called electrum, standardizing its weight, and stamping it with a state seal guaranteeing its value.
That is brilliant.
Suddenly, trade became completely frictionless. You didn't need a scale, you just counted the coins.
That is a massive paradigm shift. It completely changes the global economy. And then you have Aram, another of Shem's sons.
Yes, Aram fathered the Arameans, and the Arameans did something equally revolutionary, though in the realm of communication. Their language, Aramaic, became the lingua franca for regional commerce and diplomacy.
It was the common tongue.
Exactly. It was adopted by disparate empires to actually be able to communicate with each other.
You know, I think of Aramaic kind of like the USDC cable of the ancient world.
Oh, I like that.
Well, before Aramaic became the standard, every empire had its own proprietary language and cuneiform script, making trade incredibly clunky. If an Egyptian merchant wanted to do business with a Persian supplier, you needed a chain of specialized translators just to move a shipment of grain across borders.
Right.
But Aramaic was a simpler alphabetic language. It became the universal port. It allowed everyone to plug in and communicate seamlessly.
That is exactly how it functioned. So between the Lydian coins removing the friction of weighing silver and Aramaic removing the friction of translation, Shem's descendants were the ultimate facilitators of the ancient world's economy.
That's so cool.
But this map, this text, has a very specific underlying focus. Of all the descendants of Shem, the biblical record traces one specific lineage with the most meticulous, laser-focused detail. And that is the line stemming from Arphaxad.
Which makes perfect sense because this is where the authors of the text are tracing their own specific origins, right? They were dropping a pin on the map and essentially saying, you are here.
Precisely. The line passes through Arphaxad's son, Salah, leading to his grandson, Eber. Eber is a crucial foundational name here because historians and linguists note that it is from Eber that the very name Hebrews is derived.
Oh, so to be a Hebrew essentially means to be a descendant of Eber.
Yes, and from Eber, the family tree branches into two main lines, Joktan and Peleg. Joktan's lineage produced 13 sons, names like Azarmaveth, Sheba, Ophir, and Havla.
Okay.
They pushed south into the deep desert and founded many of the early Arabian tribes.
But the other branch is the one the narrative is really driving toward, isn't it?
It is. The other line is Peleg. This path runs straight through the generations with absolute precision. Ro, Sirug, Nahor, Terah, until it converges on one central monumental figure in history, Abraham, the patriarch of the Israelites.
Wow. Okay, so when we pull all the way back, look at the globe, and synthesize all this, what are we really seeing?
Well, when you pull all three branches together, the atlas is complete. Japheth claimed the northern seas, the steppes, and the distant coastlands. Ham conquered the south in Africa and built the heavy infrastructure and megacities of Mesopotamia. And Shem's descendants settled the vital, contested crossroads of the Fertile Crescent, spreading down into Arabia, providing the language and the currency that connected everyone.
It all fits together so perfectly.
It does. The core thesis here is undeniable. Genesis 10 is not a boring list of names to be skipped over. It is a brilliant, highly structured geopolitical encyclopedia for its time. It is a specific culture's profound attempt to map out the DNA of human civilization.
And it's doing that by making a very specific, incredibly bold claim about the nature of humanity. I mean, despite the fact that these ancient nations speak wildly different languages, despite the fact that they have radically different cultures and gods, and despite the fact that they're frequently engaged in brutal, bloody wars with one another over resources,
Right.
at their very root, humanity shares a single, interconnected origin.
This raises such an important question about how we view history and our place in it. The ultimate message of the Table of Nations is not about separating us from them. It is a map of deep, ancient, and immensely complicated connection.
Connection, not division.
Exactly. By documenting this, the ancient authors were explicitly stating that the other, even the terrifying foreign enemy massing troops across the border, is actually just a distant branch of the family.
You know, we usually think of maps as tools designed to draw rigid borders. We use them to claim territory, to build walls, to argue over resources, and basically to keep people apart.
We do.
But what if the earliest, most comprehensive map we have was designed to do the exact opposite? I really want you to think about that as you go about your week. How might it change the way you view our modern globe and even current messy geopolitical conflicts if you looked at a map and forced yourself to see every single nation not as an isolated rival entity, but as a distant branch of the exact same family tree?